Welcome to Nasdaq TradeTalks. I'm your host, Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq. We've been coming to you live from SmartCon by Chainlink in New York City. To help me close out day one's coverage, we have Sergey Nazarov, co-founder of Chainlink. We're here to discuss the evolution of cross-chain infrastructure, what needs to happen to bring more of the global financial system on chain. Sergey, it is great to see you as always. Thank you for having us back here. And
thank you for coming.
let's talk about some of the key developments in day one, because there has been a lot that has gone on today. In your keynote, you walked us through the evolution of smart contracts. Can you explain what makes smart contract institutional grade and why it matters for institutions?
So institutional grade smart contracts are the contracts that meet all the requirements of an institution. And institutions have a lot more requirements than DeFi or public chains. So institutions have requirements around identity, compliance, accounting requirements, data requirements. Their cross-chain bridges have to work in very specific ways to meet the security and reliability guarantees of moving value that institutions have to meet. So really, if the list of requirements for DeFi protocols to go cross-chain and really grow is like two oracles, a data oracle and a cross-chain bridge oracle, then the amount of requirements for an institutional smart contract are in the 10 to 15 range between all the different data, bridging requirements, identity and compliance requirements. And unless there's a system and a standard like Chainlink to simplify how these institutional smart contracts are generated and come into existence, then we will be in a world where they don't come into existence. And that'll keep all the liquidity and all the massive success of the hundreds of trillions of dollars in the traditional system out of the blockchain world, which is not what we want. What we want to do is simplify the creation of institutional smart contracts, which we've now done in many important ways, and to increase the speed and rate at which capital from the institutional world goes on chain.
Well, you also announced the launch of the Chainlink runtime environment known as the CRE. What type of impact will that have on-chain development for the industry overall?
So the Chainlink runtime environment massively reduces the time and effort that it takes to build an institutional smart contract. The Chainlink runtime environment can take the time down from months to days or hours. And we built many institutional smart contracts. For example, here at the event, we announced our live and production work with UBS, using the digital transfer agent standard from Chainlink, using the NavLink data, using a whole bunch of key capabilities from Chainlink. We also announced our work with the Central Bank of Brazil, the Central Bank of Hong Kong, the largest bank in Brazil, Inter, and that is also using the CRE as well as the cross-chain system of Chainlink CCIP. And so what we've seen in those implementations and in others is that the amount of time that it takes to get that built is a fraction of the time that it would take to get it built without CRE, because CRE gives you a single place to write a single piece of code that coordinates all the activity and all the things going on for an institutional smart contract. All the data, all the identity, all the different compliance requirements, all the bridging can now be organized in a single piece of code that runs in this runtime environment. And we think, and I think it'll have the same impact on the institutional smart contract trend that the EVM and Ethereum had on the tokenization trend back in the 15, 16, 17 kind of early days of when it was launched.
Yeah, I think equally important was the big reveal around the Chainlink confidential compute. Privacy is such a critical issue, of course, as you had mentioned before off the top. How does this technology make private smart contracts and tokens possible?
Chainlink confidential compute is part of Chainlink's larger goal of creating Chainlink privacy, which we've been researching for many years. Chainlink confidential compute is something we are releasing on top of CRE. So you can take those workflows that I described and you can write them in a confidential way, in a confidential computed way, so that the workflow does everything that I said, the data part, the identity part, all the other conditions that you can write in a workflow. But now it can be run privately, and that means that all of those computations that are run privately don't need to be on a chain. But the way that CRE works and that confidential compute from Chainlink works is that the system can prove on chain that the confidential computation was done correctly. So you can do all the confidential computations that you need. You can get all the confidential data that you need. You can verify identities and the status of identities using various technologies like Town Crier, Deco, sometime in the near future, fully homomorphic encryption technologies. So you can use various forms and guarantees of privacy, from TEs to zero-knowledge proofs to FHE, and you can provide those guarantees back to the chain in a way that the counterparty and the system and the chain knows that they were computed correctly.
Yeah, it's so interesting because one of the key themes that we have noticed that has evolved this year is really around data governance, privacy, interoperability, infrastructure. Really, the conversation has matured in that respect. But interoperability has always been a major theme at SmartCon. How do you see cross-chain infrastructure evolving from here? What needs to happen to bring more of the global financial system on chain?
Yes, so interoperability really has, I feel, two very distinct categories. Category number one is the integration of existing systems with chains. Swift messages, existing backends, existing accounting systems, all kinds of existing systems are integrated onto chains by Chainlink very successfully on a regular basis now. And it's, I think, one of the key factors that we thought would lead institutions to be comfortable and attracted to building on Chainlink. And I think we were right about that,
Right.
because we hear a lot of it publicly, we hear a lot of it privately. The Chainlink's ability to integrate with their existing system, their existing standards, makes it an attractive system in general. Then there's cross-chain interoperability, and that's the ability to move value and data across chains. Now, both of these forms of interoperability actually work together, because what you really want is you want the existing system of the institution to trigger a cross-chain event, which is what we've already shown and done many times now with Swift messages triggering various cross-chain events and other ways of triggering cross-chain events from existing systems. What's going to happen now is that as institutions go on chain more, they'll want more and more help integrating their existing systems to work with chains, which is the first type of interoperability. But because all the value and stable coins and assets are going to be spread across thousands of chains, they'll need the second form of interoperability. And the second form of interoperability will have to meet very stringent requirements, ISO requirements, SOC requirements, security requirements, cybersecurity team requirements, that I think very few bridges, or almost probably maybe no bridges other than CCIP-based bridges and nodes and systems can meet. And so what you're going to see is you're going to see a different level of standards for the data, for the cross-chain, and for the orchestration that a system needs to do in order to really work for institutions at scale. And right now, from what I can tell, Chainlink is the only place that has all those things in one place and has them to an institutional grade level that can allow the creation of these institutional smart contracts.
Yeah, well, I mean, if you think about tokenization, that's been a key topic this year, in financial services in general. So what's driving tokenization at scale, in your opinion, and how is Chainlink helping to make it secure and reliable?
So tokenization, I think, depends on the guarantee that whatever I tokenize will work, that if I transfer it, it is safe, that the data proving things about it is correct. And so if those things break down, if my tokenization of something doesn't work correctly, if I can't prove the underlying assets are there, if I can't move the token in exchange for payment to all the places and get paid in all the formats that I want to get paid in, then tokenization remains a kind of interesting idea with some benefits. But if you can tokenize in a way that it's secure and reliable, you can organize and orchestrate all of the complexity around tokenization, from compliance to identity to cross-chain to data, and you can make it efficient and simple and reliable for tokenization to happen and for those tokenized things to move across chains and to prove things about themselves and the underlying asset, then I think tokenization becomes an obvious no-brainer, right? Because the cost and complexity of tokenization goes down. The value is massive, especially in an interconnected world where those tokens can quickly and easily flow and be exchanged for many different stable coins and other forms of payment. And so I think we're really in a world where there has to be a global standard for data. There has to be a global standard for cross-chain. There has to be a global standard for compliance to reduce the cost of proper tokenization, transfer of tokens. And that's really what the Chainlink community is doing, right? So for the data standard, we have the on-chain data protocol. For cross-chain, we have the cross-chain interoperability protocol. We have our compliance standard. We have our transfer agency standard. we have more and more standards that are all going to be, by the way, very easy to use and implement in a number of hours by like a single engineer instead of 10 or 20 engineers on the CRE. And then once you have all those standards and all those ways of getting data, doing cross-chain, proving compliance and identity, and you can add privacy to that, I think that'll be the final big unlock for the institutional world.
Yeah, which makes sense to be on chain from a competitive perspective.
Right.
I need to, right?
Right.
So what are some of the other milestones and notable conversations that came out of day one from SmartCon?
I mean, I just came off of a really exciting panel with Chuck from S&P, who leads their whole DeFi team. Dan was a great guy and CTO of the DTCC digital asset side. And Lorenz, who's the lead of UBS Tokenize, who we announced our live transactions with today using the transfer agency standard I just mentioned. And it was a really great conversation because I'm seeing a lot of really senior people in these institutions start to understand and see and get commitment at even more senior levels, at the CEO levels, that tokenization, real world assets, oracles, smart contracts are a critical part of the financial system that they want to be and have to be a part of, right? And I'm also seeing UBS as an example of a great consumer who is actively now consuming the Chainlink standard in multiple ways and is actively consuming data, actively consuming transfer agency, actively consuming things in order to build products that they view as financially attractive, commercially attractive. So I think when you have that flywheel of high quality financial products on chain, commercial success for the issuers of those financial products, service providers, FMIs, everyone else seeing that and going, okay, the time has come for me to provide my services on chain. And if there's a way for all those service providers and FMIs to provide those services on chain cheaply and efficiently, and then there's a way for all of the consumers of those services to consume them through the CRE, that's really, what I think is the big contribution that we can make, is we can get all the capabilities from S&P, the DTCC, various data providers, various payment systems like SWIFT and others into the CRE, so that if you want to build this contract, you just need to write a few lines of code, and that contract can now accept payments from SWIFT, and it can use S&P data, and it can benefit from, whatever it is that DTCC is going to release for our industry to go to the next level. And so you're kind of getting an environment where you don't just have the ability to write a piece of workflow code to manage complexity, but you have all the relevant and necessary services, data services, transfer agency services, identity services, all the services in one place against which you can write a single piece of workflow code, which I think is the level of simplicity and cheapness and efficiency that we need to bring everything down to for more UBS tokenization and more kind of institutional adoption of smart contracts.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like this is the moment in time as industries across the board, not just financial services, are hyper focused on efficiencies, and not only efficiencies, but where is the value? How do I extract that? And I think that's a great use case of it. So as we're coming into day two tomorrow, what should we be watching for?
Well, tomorrow there's a ton of panels. I'm hosting many of them. There's other great panels hosted by others. We have Patrick Witt from the White House coming.
Yep, he'll be on the show as
So
well.
we'll get his perspective from the White House's point of view. There's a lot of really great institutional folks that I'm speaking with. And there's also great DeFi teams like Aave and others here. And I'm really seeing now at an entirely new level here at the conference, a kind of collaborative spirit between the DeFi crowd and the TradFi crowd, where I think they're finally starting to understand what we've been trying to explain to them for years, which is you are each other's best customer. You really should find a way to work together. You need to find a way to collaborate. And so this conference is really here to get those two groups together and collaborating. And so it's a good mix of DeFi and TradFi. And I've heard from multiple folks in the TradFi world that they've had really interesting conversations with the DeFi people. And I've seen multiple cases where the DeFi folks are having, very productive conversations. And I've heard of some things that have started moving forward just here at the conference between DeFi and TradFi organizations. So I think this kind of DeFi TradFi merging that we've been building towards and talking about is now starting to take shape.
Yeah, it's interesting. As an outsider looking in, where we've been covering Chainlink for almost 5 years at this point,
Yeah,
and to
thank
see
you.
the ecosystem grow and expand, and how all of the layers were working together, it's almost like if you're not within an ecosystem like that, it's like trying to operate without the internet, as an example. So it's been great to see the community just grow, not just in the US, but just globally as well.
Yeah, absolutely. This kind of financial internet is in some ways even more complicated than the internet because it's so regulated. And you have all these requirements where you have to have a transfer agent and you have to report the accounting a certain way. And you have to get data in a very specific way from a specific place from like a legal point of view. And so if the internet was unregulated and there was a lot of activity for sending around information that was very simple to execute, the financial internet is actually much more complex because you have all these requirements.
Right.
And then the question becomes, how does a blockchain or a set of blockchains or a bunch of different smart contracts meet all those requirements? And then once you get them to meet the requirements, how do you manage all that in an efficient, secure, easy to use system that it doesn't require 20 developers managing 20 different pieces of code, but one developer managing one piece of code that across all these different problems, you see that one piece of code solving it, right? So this is kind of the world that we see, that we in the Chainlink community are building, that if we're able to really reduce that cost of building advanced institutional smart contracts, together with all the service providers, data providers, TAs, everybody being accessible to folks through the CRE, and actually with the CRE in subsequent versions, we plan to make it possible for any developer to build any workflow or any piece of code and then resell that to other developers to use.
Yeah.
So really create a big ecosystem of people and institutions and service providers within the CRE kind of universe. I think that's really the path to solving those more complicated financial internet problems.
All right, Sergey, appreciate the insight. As always, thanks for joining us on Trade Talks.
Right.
And then thanks for joining me from SmartCon. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq.